About to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free.
Evening, everyone. Jim here. Welcome to our regular 6:30 slot on a Wednesday. Our date with AQA A-level Sociology, some live revision with our two regular guests. Can you have a regular guest presenter? Our regular presenters, Duncan and Craig. Good evening, team.
Good evening, Jim. Good evening, everyone.
Yes, absolutely. Well done to everyone who's joining us live. And we've got a couple of special festive themed, that's not easy to say, festive themed activities tonight, exclusively. These have never been seen before in any other subject, just for the live audience tonight. And of course, if you're watching on replay in the summer of 2022, you'll be thinking, what's going on? Unless you're in Australia, in which case you'll be thinking, that's perfect. But anyway, for us tonight, and tonight's topic, Duncan, Craig, it's crime and ethnicity. Let me get that right. It's been a long day, but is this the 8th in our series on crime this term? So we've really had a chance to get into the detail, haven't we? So who's leading us off? How do we want to play it? Craig, is it you? Is it Duncan?
I think
I'm up first.
Yeah, I think it's Craig up first.
Look at one of the things on the course that we look at is not only do we look at ethnicity in relation to rates of crime, but we also look at ethnicity in terms of victimization. So in our first activity, we're going to look at some of the reporting from the Crime Survey of England and Wales over the last 3 years.
Cool. Right, let's have fun. I'll have a go as well. Okay, here we go.
Okay. Thanks. Right. Okay. So on the screen, we're going to play a game of higher or lower. On the screen, we have on the left-hand side, we have an ethnic group. It says here white males, and we're going to reveal the percentage of white males that have reported being a victim of crime according to the Crime Survey of England and Wales over the last 3 years. Now, that was 14%. So 14% of respondents who identified as white and male reported that they had been a victim of crime over the last, in the crime survey of England and Wales from 2017 to 2020. Now we're going to reveal our next category, and you have to guess whether it is higher or lower. So, do more black, as a percentage, have more black female respondents on the crime survey of England and Wales reported being a victim of crime? Is it higher than 14% or is it lower? And if you just put your answer in the chat box on the right-hand side, do we think it is higher or lower? Black females, do we think they're more likely to be a victim of crime or less likely? So we've got
Ninfrendo's going with higher.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Olivia lower.
Lower. Higher. Okay, let's reveal the answer. Got a bit mixed bag there.
Mm-hmm.
It's 16%. It's slightly higher, that black females are more likely to report, on the crime survey of England and Wales, 16% of black females between 2017 and 2020 said that they had been a victim of crime. That's actually higher than black males as well. Black males is closer to white males at 14%.
But it's a similar number, isn't it? I was just going to say, because I just noticed possibly slight confusion in the chat window, so I just thought I'd sort it out slightly. You mentioned it before about we're focusing on percentages. I think sometimes people get a bit muddled with this. That obviously there are a lot fewer black females than white males in the UK. So obviously a lot less black females as a number reported that they've been victims of crime, but as a percentage of black females,
that's right. It's actually the respondents to the crime survey of England and Wales, and then that sample is typified out to the rest of the UK. Yeah. So, for example, I think there's around about, in the crime survey of England and Wales, the data that I took this from, there's about 40,000 respondents, of which 33,000 identified as white. So, and that's roughly in percentage of how it is represented across the population, across the general population. Yeah. So our next group, mixed ethnicity males. Do we think that mixed ethnicity males who were interviewed for the crime survey of England and Wales, do we think the percentage of those that reported they'd been a victim of crime is higher or lower than 16%? Do we think that's higher or lower? Are mixed ethnicity males more likely or less likely than black females to be a victim of crime or to report that they're a victim of crime? A couple of hires. Yeah, quite a few people going higher. Let's see the response. 21%. Yeah, it was higher, significantly higher. Mixed ethnicity males, and it's significant. There's a significant difference with mixed ethnicity between male and female. Male rates are about 21%. So basically, just over 1 in 5 people who identified as being from a mixed ethnic background who were male said they'd been a victim of crime. It's a lot lower, sort of like for females, at around about 15%, which is generally the average. So let's look at our final group, Asian females. Do we think Asian females are more or less likely to have reported that they were a victim of crime on the crime survey of England and Wales? Do we think that's higher or lower?
So we've got a higher coming from Olivia.
We've got a higher.
Then we've got a lower.
We've got a couple of lowers coming in. Let's reveal the answer. It's 15%. Yeah. So right about average. The group that is most likely to have reported being a victim of crime was mixed ethnicity males. There is quite a large kind of spread. There's not too much difference with the exception of some of these outliers like mixed ethnicity males. Most of them are between 14 and 16% in terms of being a victim of crime. So often when we look at sort of like these ideas, and often we sort of like see, when we look at the media, for example, we tend to see victims of crime being often presented as white, usually middle class, often female, often sort of like in that age bracket, particularly young age bracket, say, sort of like between like 24 and 35. But actually, mixed ethnicity males are the highest group based on the Crime Survey of England and Wales. In terms of numbers, it is white working class males who tend to be most likely to be the victims of crime, as just based on sheer numbers. But as a percentage of respondents on the Crime Survey of England and Wales, 1 in 5 males from a mixed ethnicity background declared that they've been a victim of crime.
Yeah,
it's something we don't often focus on when we look at ethnicity and crime. We do tend to look at sort of like why crimes happen, but we also have to look at victimization as well.
Yeah, I mean, as we said with gender last week, if you joined us then or have seen it since, the types of crimes that people might be more likely to be victims of will vary between these different groups. So, but obviously, we're just looking at the sort of totality of victimization.
I mean, one of the more interesting stats that came out earlier this year is that, for example, people from black ethnic groups are more likely to be the victims of murder than any other group. With 49 out of every million of the population being a victim of a murder. So we see disproportionate in terms of crime. So, when we look at this idea of victims in the media, and often the victims are painted to be white, middle class, usually female, more so than male, or older females or older males, actually the spread of victims is a lot broader, and some crimes, ethnic minorities are more likely to be the victim of that crime.
Yeah. Okay. Let's have a look at the next activity. So this is the first of our festive Christmassy activities. Here we're focusing on offending rather than victimization. And we're looking at one of the divisions that we think about when we think about different patterns of offending, which is whether what we're seeing is real, and if it is, what causes that, or whether the statistics are giving us a sort of misleading picture, and if so, what might be the cause of that. So we've got a number of kind of issues here, concepts here, ideas here. The idea is to sort them into the two categories. One, causes of real differences between different ethnic groups and their levels of offending, and the others, causes of statistical differences that may be the statistics being misleading rather than actually reflecting the reality. Now, some of them, just to kind of confuse matters, could potentially squeeze onto both, but that isn't an option for today. So you'd put them in one or the other, but we probably will consider where some might potentially go on either column as we chat about it. So all you need to do in the chat window, if you're watching live, is perhaps we'll go for real and stat as our two categories, and so put real and then which numbers you think cause real differences, and stat for which ones you think would create statistical differences but not necessarily actual differences. Okay, have fun. We've got a timer, we've got a Christmassy timer. Enjoy. It was definitely worth buying that glockenspiel, Craig. You don't have to do them all. Oh, Ninfrendo's come in with some. But if you want to just do a couple of them, you can do. Okay, that's very interesting. I'm just having a look at these. So Ninfrendo's coming with, I think, pretty much a full set, and is very close. And the only one that I've put somewhere different is one of the ones where I was going to say we could potentially put it under both categories, so it's not wrong. Bonnie's come in with some ones there as well, which are looking pretty good to me so far. Shall we have a look at where I put them? And we can feel free to debate them if you disagree. Okay. So
I was hoping they were going to appear under a Christmas tree.
Yeah, that would have been nice, wouldn't it? You wait for the next Christmas one, Craig.
It's a Christmas cracker.
Yeah. So for causes of real differences, we've got cultures of resistance. This is a Gilroy idea of some crime by minority ethnic groups being a kind of political, like a political act against the establishment. We've got subcultures. We've talked about subcultural theories already. There are a range of subcultural theories that link to ethnicity, and studies that look at subcultures and gangs and things like that, which you could refer to. Got marginalization. So we could link that with left realism, for example. Certain groups might be more likely to be marginalized in society. We could also have gone down a sort of relative deprivation type route there as well. Transient inner city communities. This is kind of links to some of the right realist ideas as well. I know not everyone will have got to this sort of idea yet, but this is the idea that perhaps some communities in inner city areas, because people kind of come in and then go, they're sort of perhaps where young men or young people who are working and then will end up moving somewhere else later live. They don't kind of build that sense of community that might provide some of the bonds of attachment that Hershey talked about that prevents crime. And that might be areas where you also have like kind of migrant groups, for example, and that might be some minority ethnic groups might relate to that.
Kind of all goes back to the old ecological theories as well.
Yeah,
it's like in the 1920s.
Yeah, why they have crimes in certain areas of towns and cities. Like
don't worry about them; they're not on the spec anymore.
I was going to say we spent ages
they're
on
not
that.
On the spec, don't worry.
And it got really confusing when you started talking about green crime, and it was like, hang on, anyway. You don't need to be confused by it, so we'll leave that to one side. Causes of statistical differences. So these ones I'm suggesting might lead to the statistics appearing to show a difference. Oh, Bonnie's come in with some great stuff there about the sort of ecological theories. Yeah. If we look at these are ones I'm suggesting might suggest that there are big differences between ethnic groups and offending, but that they might not be real. The statistics might be showing us something else. So institutional racism in the police is a good example of that. So if the police are particularly arresting people from certain minority ethnic groups, or more likely to, stopping and searching them, more likely to do that, etc., then that's going to skew the statistics and give an unrealistic picture. Labeling and stereotyping links with that perhaps as well. Labeling by the police, stereotyping by the police, and also people maybe describing, even in the Crime Survey England and Wales, where people don't know, they didn't actually see the offender and they don't actually know who committed the crime. They quite often or disproportionately suggest that it was someone from a minority ethnic group who did it.
Bowling and Phillips was that, or was that Sharp and Bud?
All right,
one of those two studies.
Yeah. Then interestingly, I think it was Ninfrendo put moral panic in the real differences column, and it could be, couldn't it? Because we do talk about sort of deviancy amplification as a result of a moral panic, and so it can lead to sort of a natural increase in crime as well. But another thing it can lead to is a fantasy crime wave. If suddenly everyone thinks that the big problem is knife crime in inner city London, then suddenly the police are going to have a crackdown on that. That's going to lead to it seeming like there's been a huge increase in knife crime in inner city London, whereas in fact that might be a fantasy crime wave. It's been essentially generated by the interest and the focus on that. So that's the sort of thing you can really adds a bit of depth and analysis and nuance to an answer on this sort of a question. Or if you get a question on ethnicity and crime and deviance, that idea that, we're seeing differences between different ethnic groups and offending. Here are some arguments that explain why that might be the case. Here are some arguments that explain why actually it might just appear that way in the statistics, but it is probably misleading. Okay, I'm going to pass back to Craig.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Duncan. Not a Christmassy round, but I could see that we could potentially do a Christmassy round for this one. We're going to do a picture quiz now. What happens is that we have 6 squares, and behind each square there is a question. Once you've answered the question, it reveals a piece of a picture of, in this instance, a famous sociologist. So what you have to do is you just have to provide the answer in the right-hand column. So let's have a look at our first question, please. Oblongs. Sorry, am I saying squares? Even my kids know sort of like that a rectangle is not a square, you know, or yeah, they'll be having me off for that. Okay, so which report suggested the Metropolitan Police was guilty of institutional racism in 1997? Which report suggested the Metropolitan Police was guilty of institutional racism in 1997? Quite a famous report.
It is.
And then Frendo's coming with the correct answer. It's the Macpherson Report by Lord Justice Macpherson. It was commissioned in 1997 and found that there was evidence of institutional racism in the Metropolitan Police over the handling of the murder of Stephen Lawrence. Anybody care to make a guess from this? You can't really actually see the sociologist's face, just kind of more of the background. But if you can have a guess at sort of like who the sociologist might be. Our next question: sociologist associated with policing the crisis. No, it's not Duncan's curtains, I don't think. Looks more of a tie-dye effect or a marble effect. Policing the crisis. Marx. No, it's not Marx.
Well, is that an answer to what, who, the image or
neither
the
is the answer.
It's not. Yeah, it's not either. But you know, so the picture could have been, couldn't it? It could be like an old painting of Marx or something. It's not.
Could be.
Oh, Infrendo's come in with right answer for policing the crisis.
It's Stuart. Yeah, we've said Stuart Hall, but obviously Critchley and others were involved in something like that as well. So yeah, it is Stuart Hall. It was associated with Hall et al. Yeah. Was associated with the idea of policing the piece of research to policing the crisis. Let's look at our next one. You can see a shoulder of the sociologist. The approach that suggested black crime is higher due to marginalisation and deprivation. Which sociological approach?
I think I might have referenced it earlier if people were paying attention.
I don't know if you referenced the approach. You certainly mentioned marginalisation.
I thought I had, but maybe I didn't.
Is it Stuart Hall? No, it's not Stuart Hall. Stuart Hall was the answer to the question before.
I was going to say that might have been an answer.
The picture is not Stuart Hall.
Nimfrendo's got an answer there.
Yeah, we've got one answer there, and it is a correct answer. It is left realism. Left realism approached the idea. The sociologist Lee and Young, they suggested that crime, that there was a real increase in crime in black communities because of marginalisation and deprivation. So they looked at the issues there. This one might give it away a little bit. In the middle square, can we notice who the sociologist is?
I think if people had seen a photograph of them, they'd know it now, wouldn't they?
They would. Very recognisable sociologist.
I've got one of his books on the table next to me. I can see.
Really?
I can see.
Sociologist who suggested there was a myth of black criminality. This could get confusing. The answers. Giving it away slightly. We've got an answer. I'm not quite sure if that's for the big question or the little question. But the answer, sociologist who suggested there was a myth of black criminality, yes, it was Paul Gilroy. Still very active in sociological circles. I saw a lecture from him about 3 months ago on Zoom. A free one as well. It's great. Which sociologist suggested that oppressive policing led to the overrepresentation of black males in crime statistics? For the question, it was Paul Gilroy. Which sociologists suggested that oppressive policing led to overrepresentation of black males in crime statistics? This one's a bit more recent, this one.
Although there probably are a few older studies that looked at similar.
There are, I think,
similar things.
I think 2012.
Right.
I think,
Okay.
or maybe 2005. Actually, sorry, I get my two studies by these people mixed up.
Yeah. But it is a 21st century study. It's nice to have the odd one, isn't it?
It is.
All the ones from the 70s.
I mean, some of those studies from the 70s, particularly those by like Hall and Gilroy, still very relevant. Taylor Walton and Young. Okay, it's good. It's a good shout. Taylor Walton and Young's kind of fully social theory, kind of neo-Marxist approach. It's not. Let's see the answer. It's Phillips and Bowling. I mentioned them just before. They talked about the role of oppressive policing, and a very contemporary one. I'll say very contemporary one, 3-4 years ago now. Which politician examined the ethnicity and the criminal justice system in 2017? It's a good piece of research to use, I think, particularly when you're looking at ethnicity and crime. Certainly, a very contemporary piece of research.
It's a current politician, just to help people remember. Someone who's
very
still
correct.
in Parliament. Oh,
we've got the right answer. That's right. It was David Lammy. Lammy report was published, or the Lammy review, I should say, was published in 2017, which looked at the disproportionate representation of ethnic minority citizens who were in custody, and particularly young people from ethnic minority backgrounds, and how they were overrepresented in the crime statistics. Can anyone guess what the picture was? I'm hoping you're not thinking that's David Lammy.
Oh no, they're answering the last question, Craig.
I hope so. Yeah, well, the picture is, and we kind of gave it away on question number 4. It is Paul Gilroy.
Paul Gilroy.
Yeah, it is. And so there's quite a few little bits and pieces of research that you can use, sort of like, to answer questions in terms of ethnicity and crime. And I'll move back over to Duncan now.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to do one of our on balance activities here. So this is where, we can have a bit of a debate, the sorts of things that might come up perhaps in an essay as you sort of considering the strengths and limitations of an argument, doing a bit of evaluation. And here we're going to be looking at quite a specific idea here, is whether differences in offending by ethnicity are caused by institutional racism, whether the reasons for statistical differences in offending by ethnicity are a result of institutional racism, or primarily a result of institutional racism. So first of all, I'd like us to think of some arguments or evidence that supports that argument. So I'll give you a little bit of time to type, those of you watching live. What do you think? Can you think of any arguments or evidence to support? We have had a little bit that we've had stuff we could mention already, so feel free to refer to that, or you could come up with something different.
There's one that's very commonly used by students to talk about the statistical differences, isn't there, really? One that's a statistic that is used very commonly, talking about institutional racism.
That's
true.
You
might want to use.
Yeah. So Cicerel Nimfrendo said typifications may lead to an over persecution of people who the police think may be criminal, such as ethnic minorities. So, yeah, I mean, yes, you're right. Absolutely, it's a good point. And Bonnie's also mentioned deviance, amplification, spiral, and typifications. So, yes, related to institutional racism could be typifications and stereotypes and labeling, etc. Could be, part of the picture of institutional racism. Institutional sort of refers to kind of systems and procedures and policies, more than perhaps the sort of cultural discretion or cultural race, sort of, I can't think of the right word for that, sort of canteen culture type thing, which we could also talk about here, where but both is probably true. Things like profiling and things like that is sort of institutional and cultural. It can be. And I think before my answers come up, I think the one Craig was probably hinting at, is anyone going to get that? It's a statistic or a measure that is often referred to where it appears to be quite clear that the police is doing a particular thing more to certain ethnic people from certain ethnic backgrounds than others. It's not actually one of the two that's coming up on my side, so I'm going to mention it, but it does come up on the other side, interesting, which is stop and search. I assume that's what you were going for, was it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, stop and search statistics.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Ninfrendo said it there. Yeah. And Bonnie's talked about judges being less diverse. Yeah, so we've talked here about institutional racism. I was sort of imagining institutional racism in the police, but of course we could talk about institutional racism across the criminal justice system. Absolutely. Yes. So if I haven't been specific about the police, so that's a perfectly good point. Well done. And yes, stop and search is something you could definitely talk about. And if you've got some specific figures at the tips of your fingers on stop and search, they can be very handy. We'd already mentioned the Macpherson report, and that's a good piece of evidence to put forward that a report, a very comprehensive report, concluded that the Metropolitan Police at that time was institutionally racist. So you've kind of got that evidence there, and there have been. Sorry,
I was going to say it made 70 recommendations, didn't it?
Yeah.
70 recommendations in order to address issues of institutional racism within the Metropolitan Police. That's also got kind of the level of it.
Yeah, we've also had subsequent research. I mean, the one I've referenced there is getting on for quite an old bit of research now as well. It was a BBC documentary called The Secret Policeman, where someone went undercover in the Manchester Police, Greater Manchester Police, and found evidence of the police arresting people based and also using their discretion, so choosing to enforce the law or not based on racism and but on such a systematic level that you could say it was part of, it was institutional, and that the training processes and stuff didn't succeed in weeding out people with these opinions, etc. So there's quite a bit of both the sort of stop and search statistical evidence and research evidence to kind of back up this idea that institutional racism is a significant factor. What could we put on the sort of other side of the argument? Is there anything we could say to suggest that perhaps institutional racism isn't the main factor or isn't as big a factor as that side of the scale suggests? Any thoughts? Trying to when he's replied, I'm just trying to work out, trying to just their existence by defining. Right. I mean, there's been a lot. I don't know if this is quite what the comment in the chat window is referring to, but there's been a lot of emphasis in the police since Macpherson on dealing with this issue. So there was all the kind of, there's been a lot of equality and diversity training and initiatives to try and deal with institutional racism. And, Macpherson was a number of years ago now. Right, realist type ideas. Yeah, I mean, so there are a whole range of other explanations, aren't there? I think we can just reject the biological assumptions that's mentioned there, because that's just they're a hugely outdated idea.
Yeah.
But lots of there are loads of other theories to explain, some of which we've already mentioned, to explain why these differences might exist. So that's other factors: marginalization, relative deprivation, subcultures, all the stuff, But yeah, right, realist ideas, all sorts of stuff that you could talk about there as alternative explanations. There are also some specific criticisms or counter arguments on the particularly on the stop and search issue. Waddington et al. Did some research, and based on their research, they found that the people who were being stopped and searched were representative of what they described as the available population. So, of the people who were out and about on the street in the areas that were being patrolled at the times that patrols were happening, the people who were being stopped were largely representative of who was out and about. Now, there's a lot you could say back on the other side of the argument about that. Is like, well, are they patrolling the right areas? Are they patrolling at the right times? Is that
it kind of goes down that Marxist route then of selective law enforcement, doesn't it? As an evaluation of that, where you would say, well, where are they concentrating their resosources as a result?
Yeah. So, and it's also worth bearing in mind that Waddington et al.'s research was at least in part funded by a police force, and so it was kind of. That's not to say that it would give inaccurate readings, but it was sort of setting out to try and show that maybe stop and search wasn't as biased as it maybe appeared in the raw statistics.
That'd be a good one for a theory and methods session, wouldn't it? Really,
it would.
When we look at objectivity and values.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So well done, really good. I'll hand back to Craig.
Okay, thank you, Duncan. Now, we've mentioned institutional racism a few times. We're going to do a new activity we've not really done on our sociology live streams, where we're going to give you a timeline, and particularly we're going to look here at what we might see as being conflicts between ethnic minority groups and the police in terms of institutional racism, and how we can see this history of institutional racism coming about. And certainly, these are some high-profile cases that have occurred over the last 50-odd years. And what I would like you to do is place them in order. So on the left, so what you would do is you would put 1A, so and so on and so forth, in the right-hand box. So we start with 1970, 1981, 92, 93, 2011, and 2012. And then on the right-hand side, we've got some things that have happened. The Stephen Lawrence murder, the Trayvon Martin murder, which happened in the USA. We've got the Brixton, Bristol and Toxteth riots, which are often seen as being sort of like a kind of precursor to a lot of sort of like, a result of a lot of the things that Lex Hall and Gilroy wrote about. Oops. Kind of gave that away a little bit. The Tottenham riots. The Tottenham riots. There's been quite a few different things at Tottenham riots. I'm talking about the ones that started on the back of the shooting of Mark Duggan. So the ones with Mark Duggan, because obviously there have been some that I didn't want to mention, because obviously Tottenham riots have happened a few times. Yeah. The Mangrove Nine, which was 9 Black Caribbean residents who all congregate around the Mangrove Cafe. They were charged with incitement to riot by the police when they protested against aggressive policing of the Mangrove Cafe. It was recently on television as a drama series that was part of the Small Act series that was done by Steve McQueen. It was really good. I thought I really enjoyed that one. And the Rodney King trial. Rodney King, if you don't know, was an African American who was beaten by 4 cops. 4 cops. I've gone really American there. 4 American police officers in Los Angeles, and it sparked a trial. And after the trial, after the 4 policemen were acquitted, it started riots in areas of Los Angeles. Yeah. So obviously, sort of like it led to very fractious relations between ethnic minority groups and the police, and there was a lot of clashes within those riots, particularly between the Black community, Korean community, white communities in areas of Los Angeles as a result. So what we want to do is I want you to try and line them up so that sort of like you put the event in line with the date. Do we have a timer for this one?
I think we just give them a little bit of time. You don't feel you have to do them all at once. You can sort of suggest what you think might be the early one. Any of them. Yeah, just do the letter and the number to suggest which one you think you know. Of course, there are some more contemporary examples of similar things that we could refer to. I know some of those are pretty contemporary, but just in the last year or so, haven't they, with around some of the Black Lives Matters campaigns and things. And
well, the Trayvon Martin murder is where the Black Lives Matter movement first came about, after the Trayvon Martin murder.
Yeah, that might help with the timings a bit, with the years a bit.
It's a bit of a tough one. What we're looking to do, really,
riots in lots of areas, didn't they? What we've described as the Tottenham riots, sometimes referred to as the London riots, and in fact happened. Yeah, there were ended up being riots in a number of other cities as well. You're quite likely to have touched on that or heard about that at some point, and maybe have heard of it with the year. People quite often talk about it with the year as part of the name of the riots, so that might help identifying that one. We've got one D.
Give it a little bit. Yeah, 1D. So we've got the Stephen Lawrence murder was 1983. I'll tell you that is correct. Yep. It was 1993.
5A from Bonnie as well.
I think it was April 1993. 5A. That is also correct. Angela is saying 3E. Yes, it was. How are these incidents determined to be specifically racial? Well, if you look at the usual victims of those, they are all from ethnic minority groups. So Rodney King was African American, and those who were arrested in the Mangrove 9 trial were sort of like all, I think, Black Caribbean. Certainly, sort of like from a Black community in London. Tottenham riots. Mark Duggan was I think he was Black Caribbean as well. Yeah. Brixton, Bristol, and Toxteth riots all started in areas of those cities, or areas of those cities which were which had been over policed. And those areas, sort of like people, the population of the people who lived there were predominantly from ethnic minority groups. Yeah. Trayvon Martin was killed by a white police officer, and he was African American. And Stephen Lawrence was killed by, two have been found guilty of it now, but I think it was 4, or was it 5 white youths on his way home.
It was undoubtedly a racist.
Racially related attack,
and obviously, I suppose, as well as that, with all of these cases, it's the broader consequences or significance of these cases are all related to issues to do with ethnicity. I suppose the one that's perhaps, the one where you could say maybe, it's slightly, it's certainly broader, that would be the Tottenham riots, the London riots, because although it began with around Mark Duggan,
it did.
The riots
it went wider. It did become wider. Yeah. I mean, even touch places around us. Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
So 1970 was the trial of the Mangrove. 1970 was the trial of the Mangrove 9, where the 9 Black residents who lived near the Mangrove Cafe were all charged with incitement to riot by the police. It was one of the first instances where the court actually agreed that there was institutional racism in place. Brixton, Bristol, and Toxteth riots obviously it started in ethnic minority areas, also spread to other areas as well. It then brought about the Scarman Report in 1981, which looked at the inequalities that existed in British society. The Rodney King trial was 1992, and then Stephen Lawrence murder, which brought about the Macpherson Report 4 years later, was 1993, and the Tottenham riots 2011, and the Trayvon Martin murder, which led to which started the Black Lives Matter movement, was in 2012. So just a brief history really of sort of the kind of ethnicity and crime there. Move on to you, Duncan, for our last Christmas round.
Yeah, and it's a quick little, it's a fun, quick little Christmas one, just to send you off. It's Santa's Riddle. Santa's going to come flying across the screen in a moment with a few clues to a sociologist. By the time you get to the last clue, you're going to know it if you've been paying attention. I can tell from some brilliant comments in the chat window that you have been paying attention. But let's see how quickly you can get it. See if you can get it from the first or second clue. Okay, shall we see what clues Santa's going to bring? Here he comes. So, I was born in Jamaica in 1932. You have to read it quickly because he fades away into the night sky. Here comes clue 2.
1932 should be 89.
If you're still with us, yeah. I was a neo-Marxist professor of cultural studies. And finally, and this is the one that's going to give it away, because we have mentioned this. I wrote Policing the Crisis. Infrendo came in too early there, but it was a good guess with Gilroy, but it wasn't Gilroy. It was... Yes, we should have had nicer sort of sleigh bells and stuff going on there, but anyway, it doesn't matter. It was Hall, Bonnie, well done. Yes, Infrendo too, got that right. It was Stuart Hall. You should be hearing the fireworks now. Anyway, it doesn't it doesn't matter. We'll use it again sometime before Christmas.
Maybe the music
I heard starts.
Maybe the music only starts in December.
That must be it.
It's too early for sleigh bells.
It's never too early for sleigh bells, Duncan, as you know. Or Christmas trees. Big news, we've just put the Christmas tree up in the tutor office. So, and the chocolates. Christmas can begin, can't it? Officially. Fantastic. Awesome stuff. Well, that's our 8th live session on Crime and Deviance. We've got a couple more to come, and then a festive special, which I think might draw on all kinds of different sociological and other topics. Maybe a bit of trivia, bit of reality TV, which we'll do in the last week before Christmas. Many thanks for everyone who's joined us. We'll sort out the sound effects for the next week's sessions. If you're watching on Catch Up and Replay, don't forget, if you go to tutor.net/live, you can see all of the sessions this year. But also, there's about another 20 that we've done on A-level Sociology earlier this year. Loads of stuff covered. Really useful stuff if you've got some mocks or other assessments coming up before or just after Christmas. And if you have, of course, all the best with those. I'm sure it'll be fine. Right, Duncan, Craig, I think it's time to go. We'll see you this time next week, or this time at 6:30, on next Wednesday, for our next session.
Okay. See ya. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye.